In our past few lectures, we've been talking about the four essentials and the four preconditions of life. Most textbooks start right in on what is a cell as kind of a starting point for biology because cells are common to all of life. And even things that are not considered life, like viruses, need cells to help them reproduce themselves. So cells are kind of where it all happens in biology. And today's lecture is all about cells. This lecture is going to describe how cells organize the four essentials that we learned about. So just to review, we had things that were boundaries. That was one of our four essentials. Things that were information, things that were machines, and things that were usable energy as our four essentials. So let's look at how cells handle and organize those four essentials. Cells themselves are surrounded by boundaries. That's what you call a cell. What's what you call not a cell. There are often little compartments inside of a cell, and the bigger the cell is, the more you need these little compartments to keep everything organized, and so that, as we'll learn later, things can get around fast enough if the cell is big. So the cell really helps coordinate how big those boundary layers are. It makes new boundaries as the cell grows and the divides. It keeps manufacturing more and more boundaries. And if a boundary is broken, it has ways of fixing those. So cells really organize boundaries. What about information? Well, cells contain the information and keep the information safe, keep the information from being corrupted. So if there's any errors in, let's say, copying the DNA or RNA, the cell is set up to fix those copy errors. RNA is the short-term information storage inside of a cell, and DNA is the long-term storage. Some viruses only have RNA, so for them, that is their long-term storage, but even they have to hijack other cells in order to have that same stability that you get from DNA. So if the whole world only had RNA viruses attacking cells that were made of RNA only, things would really get out of whack soon because it doesn't have the same stability that DNA does. And here we are talking about stability, which is one of our four preconditions. So they are interrelated. Now, what about energy? Usable energy? Cells are where that energy is obtained, often from the sun in plant cells. And it's where the energy is used. So even when I flex my muscles and I'm using energy, that's all happening at the cellular level. That's where that's all organized and happening. And finally, what about machines? Cells do their functions by using protein machines primarily and also some RNA machines. Cells are really great things. They were not discovered until 1665 by Robert Hooke, who called them cells because they looked like little monastery apartment rooms called cells. And that's pretty much what they look like today if you take a microscope. Little tiny building blocks, little tiny apartments in a tissue. Now, I like to think of cells as self-contained units, especially when you talk about single-cell organisms that can survive all by themselves. And in that sense, a story that kind of brings this all to mind is the story of a guy named Borg Osland, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, he's a Norwegian, who went to the North Pole all by himself in 1994. He not only did it by himself, he did not have any support. Nobody dropped packages of food for him. He did not have any dogs to help him. He didn't have any equipment that would propel him up there, like with a sail or a motor or something like that. So he just literally skied himself to the North Pole. It actually has never been done before then or since then, and he brought everything he needed to have to survive those 52 days. He ended up skiing and walking about 600 miles, which is only 12 miles per day, which I think you probably could do on your own, but he was doing it, of course, in the North Pole climate and with the barriers of snow and ice and walls and things like that. His sled weighed under 300 pounds when he started, so he was pulling behind him something that weighed more than he did himself. And he had to carefully load it up so it wouldn't be too heavy with just the right material. For example, he loaded it up with porridge and fat, which is what he ate every day to stay alive. And he even had a book, but he cut the cover off, ripped the cover off, and cut the margins of his book to save on the weight of that and even a little volume so that it would be more streamlined. So this guy who went to the North Pole is just like a cell in my mind. And so you should imagine, what items would you pack if you were walking and skiing to the North Pole? And what containers would you pack them in? How would you prepare this sled that you would tow behind you? And what would you do in order to make sure everything stayed safe? Once you do that little mental activity, think about how cells pack what they have to ensure that they can stay alive for 52 days or even longer, and how they continually make sure that they keep everything organized. Beyond that, think about how that they propagate their DNA from one generation to the next. How do they obtain and burn energy? And how their barriers are well suited for all the things that they need to pack inside. So in other words, think about how the 4 essentials work inside of the cell as you think about the cell like a little Arctic explorer. This kind of thing is fun. It gives you a way of kind of personifying that little cell, but it also helps you get at the amazing engineering feat that cells must accomplish by keeping everything together and packing everything that they need. And it's a great way of starting off on our voyage of learning biology and appreciating at every level the biology has what it needs to move forward. And if you're going to the next level, you may want to look at the following leafs out of BioBook. For example, what is the leaf that says what is the most basic unit of life, of course, which is the cell, and what is the average size of a cell? And it turns out that depends on what type of cell you're thinking about. So compare the definition of life in the leaf, what is the most basic unit of life, to the list in a previous leaf that you read called what are the common characteristics that you were assigned previously in a lecture.